Hey guys, what's up, Zyflin here, and in today's video we're going to be learning how to mod our primary weapon, so that is rifle and shotgun builds and stuff like that. So we're just going to go ahead, we're going to jump to the arsenal. First things first, you want to go ahead and choose a weapon that you want to build. So we're going to use the Braton Prime in today's example. We're going to go ahead and we're going to press upgrade. I'm going to go all the way over to my config C because I know it's an empty config that I have. Now, first things first, how do we know how much damage our weapon actually deals? So if we take a look at the damage little title over here on the left hand side of the screen, then we can see impact, puncture, and slash. Now these are 3 different damage types that your weapon, so in our case the Braton Prime, has. When you add these together, you get your total damage value, and that is 44.4 for us. So in the ideal circumstance where an enemy has no weaknesses and no resistances, this weapon is going to deal 44.4 damage per bullet. But that's not how it actually is in Warframe. Sometimes enemies are weak to certain damage types, sometimes they are resistant to certain damage types. So let's say, for example, an enemy is weak to slash, they might take 75% more damage. So if you dealt 100 slash damage to an enemy, it would add 75 to that, so you would deal 175 slash damage. But let's say they are 50% resistant to puncture, and you dealt 100 puncture damage, you would then only deal 50 puncture damage. So long story short, all you really need to know is that some enemies are weak to and resistant to different damage types, so impact, puncture, slash, and this also includes elemental damage that we can apply to our weapons as well. So if you take a look at your weapons modding section, you're going to see that you have 9 different slots for mods. One of them is an Excellus slot, so totally forget about that one. We have 8 modding slots where we can throw on mods which are going to increase our damage. And because we're limited to how many mods we can actually throw on, we want to find the most efficient ways of increasing our damage. So I'm going to give you guys an example of an inefficient way of increasing your damage, and it's by using a mod such as Piercing Hit. Now the reason that is inefficient to use Piercing Hit in this example is because Piercing Hit is only going to increase the puncture stat under our damage on the left hand side. So if I go ahead and I throw it on, you'll see that my total damage goes up and my puncture damage goes up, but it only goes up by 90% of the puncture value that we have on our weapon. What's far more efficient is to use a mod such as Serration, and the reason that we want to use Serration is because it just gives you plus damage, and it's going to take the 3 different damage types we have on our weapon, so impact, puncture, and slash, and it's going to increase all of those by the value that's on your Serration mod. So long story short, again, there's some mods in the game that are worth it to equip, and there's some mods that are just totally never worth it to equip. I'll give you guys an even better example. So we have that Piercing Hit mod, which gives us 90% puncture damage, which, you know, you could maybe say, well, if my weapon only deals puncture damage, that might be okay. But the thing is, the Piercing Caliber mod exists, so that gives you plus 120% puncture damage. So again, that just makes the mod Piercing Hit completely never worth it to use because this Piercing Caliber mod exists. But you're only ever going to use a mod like Piercing Caliber where it increases only one of the physical damage types, so impact, puncture, slash, whenever a weapon's total damage is made up of like 90 to 95, 100% off the weapon's total damage. Or if you're trying to do something really specific and different, but we're not going to cover that type of stuff in this video. So this Serration mod is a mod that you always want to have equipped on your primary weapons, being rifle, bows, etc., whenever you're starting out in the game. And next up, we want to find out how do we increase our damage efficiently again. So you might be taking a look at this now and being like, you know, I could throw on Piercing Hit, or I could throw on Piercing Caliber now and get more damage that way, right? Well, no, because there's also a more effective way of adding more damage to our weapon via elements. So if you find any elemental mod that you have, we're going to use heat damage in this example. So this Hellfire mod, this is going to give you plus 90% heat. And this works similar to how Serration works. It's going to take your impact, puncture, and slash value, add those together, take 90% of that and give that to you in the form of heat damage. So if we go ahead and we throw this on, you'll see that heat gets added to my damage equation here on the left hand side, and then it gets added on to the total. And because heat is a totally new damage type, enemies are also going to be weak or resistant to the heat damage. Elemental mods also come with status effects. So for example, you think about fire damage, right? Fire burns enemies, so if we have this Hellfire mod on, which gives us the fire damage, and we have a status chance, so that's this value right here of 26%, we can hover over that and see how often heat status effect is going to be applied to the bad guy. So here it says heat 12.3%, so 12.3% of the time, the enemies are going to start burning. You can go ahead and increase the amount that enemies start burning in the heat damage example by throwing on a mod that gives you heat damage and also more status chance. So if we go ahead and we throw on ferment rounds here, you see that our heat damage goes up, our status chance goes up, and our heat status chance has now went to 25%. So we like to call the elemental mods which give you 90% of the damage type that you're looking for, we call those just the 90% mods. And then we have the 60-60 mods, which are the ones that give you 60% of an element and then 60% status chance. And basically the two of these represent two different styles of modding. So if you want to just see bigger numbers on the bullet impact with an enemy, you'd go for the 90% mods. But if you want more damage over time and maybe killing, higher level enemies, more DPS, stuff like that, more armor stripping, for example, via status effects, more bleed procs, you would go for the likes of the 60-60 mods. So in Warframe, there's many different types of enemies. There are enemies that have yellow health bars, enemies that have mainly red health bars, and enemies that have a mixture of like blue and red or blue and yellow health bars. The enemies with the yellow health bars are usually Grineer enemies, and they have armor. That's what the yellow color signifies. The enemies that have blue in their health bar, they are normally Corpus enemies, and they have shields, which is the blue. And the enemies which have only the red health bars, sometimes yellow, those are the infested enemies, and they don't have basically anything to protect their health. It's just health. So knowing how the enemies protect themselves actually helps us determine which types of elements we want to throw onto our weapon. So for example, if we are playing against those armored enemies, we want to go ahead and use corrosive damage. Why do we want to use corrosive damage? It's because corrosive damage actually strips away the armor of the enemies when it applies a status effect. So to make corrosive, we go ahead and we throw on Infected Clip and Stormbringer, and they have to be beside one another in the modding section. Well, they don't have to be beside one another, but they have to come one after the other. So I could have Infected Clip up here in slot number 1, and then I could have Stormbringer down here in the final slot, and it would still give me corrosive. But if I were to go ahead and throw Hellfire in between the two of them, then it would give me gas and electric damage, because fire and a toxin are combining for the gas. So I just have to make sure that Stormbringer is after Infected Clip and Hellfire is after Stormbringer to make my corrosive and heat combination. So the corrosive elemental damage is going to deal bonus damage versus those enemies with the yellow health bar, and the fire is going to deal bonus damage versus those enemies as well. You can figure this out for yourself by taking an enemy that's in the game. Let's say you scan him into your codex. You can come into your codex and view him here, and then if you look under where it says faction Oricon, you can see ferrite armor, bone flesh, etc, etc. So the ferrite armor, so the yellow part of his health bar, is going to take 75% additional damage from the corrosive elemental damage type. Now each of those pluses is 25% if you look at the little corrosive icon there, and then his cloned flesh is going to take additional damage from the fire that we've got equipped as well. So if you happen to strip away all of the armor, then he's going to take more damage to his red, which is under his yellow, from fire. So long story short, you want to find out what the most threatening enemies are in each of the factions. So the Grineer, the Corpus, the Infested, the Corrupted, and many more. And then you want to base the elements that you use on your weapons around the most dangerous enemies. So that was a heavy gunner. Heavy gunners are quite tanky, but in some cases you might say to yourself that, hey, bombards are actually more threatening to me than the heavy gunners, and you might want to go ahead and run radiation damage. Now to make radiation damage, you have to go ahead and run Hellfire besides Stormbringer to make radiation, like so. I've made radiation toxin here, and that's totally okay too. But there are many more things to consider. So for example, as the enemy's levels get higher and higher and higher, the enemy's armor values also get higher and higher and higher, and that's why most players, they will go for corrosive, because of course corrosive, the status effect has that bonus effect of reducing the enemy's armor by so much. Heat, the status effect for that whenever they're burning, actually also reduces their armor too, so it's quite good versus those armored enemies as well. So as a general rule of thumb, whenever you're playing against the Grineer enemies, you want to go ahead and run corrosive and fire. When you're playing against the Corpus enemies, you want to go ahead and run magnetic and toxin. And then whenever you're playing against the Infested, you want to go ahead and run corrosive and fire again, because there are some enemies within the Infested faction which have armor, which are going to be a little bit difficult to take down if you don't have corrosive damage on your weapon. Okay, so what we've done is we free on Serration to increase our damage basically across the board. We free on our elemental mods so we can have bonus elemental effects applied to the enemies to reduce their armor, their shields, maybe burn them a little, stuff like that. And we've also made sure that we are using the right element, which is going to deal additional damage to the enemies based on the defensive things that they've got. So what's happening now is that we are running low on mod slots, right? So we want to find even more additional ways of increasing the amount of damage that we deal just by using as little mods as possible. So let's do a quick little math lesson. If we take 2 and we add 5, we end up with 7. But if we take 2 and we multiply it by 5, we end up with 10. So what I'm trying to say is, now we want to add multipliers into our modding setup. So the easiest way to multiply the damage that we want to deal is to shoot more bullets, right? So we have this stat in the game called multi-shot. In this case, we're going to be using a mod called split chamber. And if we go ahead and we throw split chamber on, basically what's going to happen is 90% of the time, instead of shooting 1 bullet, we're going to shoot 2 bullets. So let's just go ahead, throw that on, and you can see that my damage has just went from 435.3 all the way up to 761.8. Really efficient way of just dealing more damage. So we've multiplied our damage by a little bit. So should we add more damage, or should we multiply the damage that we're dealing again? I think we should multiply the damage that we're dealing again. And if you take a look under the damage tab on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that you have a critical multiplier. How do we take advantage of that? We have to increase our critical chance. So to increase your critical chance, you just want to go ahead and throw on a mod, which is going to increase your critical chance. And this is going to take the critical chance value that is on your gun, add 150% of that value on top, and that's going to be your final critical chance. So if I go ahead and I throw on Point Strike here, you can see that my critical chance just went up to 75%. So now 75% of the time, we're going to be dealing 2.2 times more damage. Is there a way to make that critical multiplier bigger, you ask? There definitely is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to type in the mod Vital Sense. And as you can see, it is going to increase our critical damage by 120%. So it's going to take that critical multiplier of 2 times or 2.2 times, and it's going to increase it to 4.8 times. So we have basically just doubled our damage again. So as a beginner player, this is what your primary weapon modding setup should look like. You should have on an elemental combination, so that is Stormbringer and Infected Clip in our case, with a additional element on top of that, so Hellfire for heat. You should have on Vital Sense and Point Strike to increase your critical chance and your critical damage, Serration to increase your base damage, and Split Chamber to give yourself more multi-shot. This is what you're aiming for as a new player. Of course, this is assuming that the critical chance on your weapon is, high enough to sort of be taken advantage of. Because of how mods work in Warframe, it is taking the value that already exists on your weapon, finding whatever percentage of that, and then adding that on top. So if you have a weapon that has a 0% critical chance, there's nothing to pull from. So Point Strike would take 150% of 0 and add that on top. It would still be 0, right? So if it's too low of a critical chance, going for crit chance and crit damage isn't worth it. So in that case, the weapon normally has a higher status chance value. So you would go ahead and you would use those 60/60 mods, which we mentioned earlier, instead of these 90% elemental mods, because we want to be applying as many status effects as possible to take advantage of, the status effects that you can apply. So reducing the enemy's armor, or making them burn, or making them bleed, stuff like that. So if you were building for status chance, this would be the type of build that you would want to sort of go for. And as you can see, we do have additional slots. Now I'm going to go ahead and swap back to the critical chance build that I was showing you guys. Now we have this final slot. We've got our multi-shot, we have our base damage, we have our crit chance, crit damage, we have our elements. What do we throw into this final slot? Anything you want. Basically anything you want, just not another element, because that extra element is going to combine with your single element. So if I was to throw cold in here, it would combine into blast, which just isn't good. It actually deals less damage versus armored enemies, and we're building versus armored enemies. But if I was gonna say, you know what, I want to deal more damage versus Grenier, I might consider throwing on a Beam of Grenier mod, and that is basically another damage multiplier, which is going to just amplify the amount of damage that you deal across the board versus the Grenier faction. Very good, very nice. But also, if you have it, Hunt Munitions, this is a good mod. So 30% chance to apply a slash proc on a critical hit. So this is actually going to deal damage directly to an enemy's health through their armor. So this final slot if you're going for like a basic beginner crit build, you can throw anything you want on here apart from another element. If you have another way to amplify your crit damage, let's say with a hammer shot, for example, you can go ahead and use that as well. It's really down to you. Another thing to note is if you keep on increasing your critical chance, your crits are actually going to deal more damage. So if you hover over critical chance on the damage screen here, you can see that values over 100% have a chance to become a big critical hit, so an orange crit, and over 200% have a chance to become a super critical hit, which is a red crit. Different color means different amount of damage amplified, I guess you could say. So just more crit chance means more damage. So as you keep on playing through Warframe and you complete every single node on the star chart, you're going to unlock Steel Path. But what you'll find is Steel Path is too difficult with your basic modding setups, and you want different ways to deal more damage. So what I want you guys to do is to play Arbitrations, which is a different game mode that you unlock. And as you play Arbitrations, you're going to get a resource known as Vitus Essence. You take that Vitus Essence and you spend it with this vendor here at the Arbiters of Hexus in basically any relay. Here I am on the map. So you come to this guy here, go ahead and scroll down, and you want to be picking up every single one of these galvanized mods. Now, these galvanized mods are conditional mods. So basically, when a certain condition is met, aka you get a kill or something, you're going to get a bonus. And these bonuses actually scale a lot higher than your standard mods in the game. So for example, galvanized crosshairs on headshot plus 120% critical chance when aiming for 12 seconds. So a way to get even more crit chance. So you want to get every single one of these mods. So the easiest example that I can give you guys is Galvanized Chamber, which is basically the same as Split Chamber, just better. It reads plus 80% multi-shot on kill, plus 30% multi-shot for 20 seconds, stacks up to 5 times. So effectively, we just get far more multi-shot using Galvanized Chamber over Split Chamber. It's just we need to be getting kills for it to ramp up to give us the maximum amount of multi-shot. So what I would do if I was using this build and I wanted to do some Steel Path content, I would just take this Galvanized Chamber mod and throw it in that slot. Now it's going to look like you're dealing less damage, but you're actually dealing more damage. Galvanized Chamber is pretty much a must run on every single primary weapon build that you've got. Galvanized Aptitude, on the other hand, is a little bit different because this mod has some weird interactions with different weapons. Sometimes it gives you more damage in an additive way, and other times it gives you more damage in a multiplicative way. And depending on which way it does it, determines if this mod is worth using. Generally, explosive AoE weapons can't make great use of Galvanized Aptitude because the explosion that happens with an explosive weapon doesn't get the Galvanized Aptitude bonuses applied, only the direct hits. Down in the description below, I've got a big spreadsheet linked which is going to tell you how this mod interacts with different guns. So it'll tell you if it is additive, it will tell you if it applies multiplicatively, it will also tell you if there's any like weird interactions with the explosions and stuff like that. So that spreadsheet is community driven. So basically you have a ton of different players that are testing and, you know, saying if it works, if it doesn't work, if it's good, if it's not good, that there type of thing. So refer to that spreadsheet in the description below before putting together a build. And there's even some unique cases, like with the Stulta, for example, you can make a build which is based on like the AoE explosion version of it because it has an alt fire, which makes explosions. But then it also has a regular fire, which is just direct hit. So in one case, or one type of build for that specific weapon, it's worth using this mod, and then in the other case, it's just not worth using the mod. But Galvanized Aptitude might be referred to as a thing called Gun CO, so Gun Condition Overload. Condition Overload is a melee mod, which was the original sort of like more damage based on the amount of status effect applied, which is what this mod does. You get more damage per the status type affecting the target for 20 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. Then we have Galvanized Scope here, which is on headshot plus 120% critical chance when aiming for 12 seconds. On headshot kill plus 40% critical chance when aiming for 12 seconds, stacks up to 5 times. This is a very powerful mod, but you need to be able to like get kills already, so you can't be using this as your sole way of getting critical chance, and we usually end up throwing this on last if we have like a flex slot. So I would use this over the likes of Being of Grenier in this example if I had some way to get the same type of multiplicative effect for my damage basically from the likes of Rhino's Roar. So if you play Rhino, you would run a build which looks like this. But if you don't play Rhino and you're not making use of Rhino's Roar, go ahead and make a build like this. And it's simply because Rhino's Roar ability basically does the exact same as Bane of Grenier. As you progress through Steel Path, you're going to be getting Arcanes from the boss enemies known as Acolytes, and these are basically even more conditional mods which you can use to replace mods on your actual build. So if we go ahead and we take a look at the first one, the most common one, Primary Merciless, it says on kill, plus 30% damage for 4 seconds, stacks up to 12 times, and also 30% reload speed. So basically, that's just Serration. It's just a better Serration. You need to be getting kills for it to take effect, but you will be able to get kills to build this up. And whenever it's totally built up, then you just have more damage than if you were running Serration. So hopefully you guys see where I'm going with this. Because we have Primary Merciless on, we can go ahead and we can take off Serration, and now we have a free mod slot to throw something else on. What we throw into this slot heavily depends on the type of content that we're doing and the type of loadout that we're running. For example, if I was using an AoE explosive weapon, it might be a good time to throw on Prime Firestorm so the blast radius of my weapon is bigger. If I'm using a weapon which has a slow fire rate, I could maybe throw on Prime Shred for more fire rate and punch through. I could even throw Hunt Munitions on in here. These Arcanes basically exist as a way to open up modding slots so you can do different things with your weapons and sort of make them your own, or, make their weaknesses not as bad, that there type of stuff. Also, the damage from these Arcanes literally just scales a lot higher as well, and you get some cool passive effects like that extra reload speed. So Primary Merciless is the go-to primary Arcane because it's quite easy to trigger. It triggers on direct kill and even on damage over time effects. We also have Primary Deadhead here. Now this is a little bit more difficult to trigger because you have to get a direct kill with a headshot or a weak point kill. It requires only 3 stacks to get the full effect from it, and it also does the same thing where it replaces Serration on your primary weapon build. As a final bonus, whenever it's maxed out, you get more headshot damage multiplier and a lower weapon recoil, which is quite nice. This is good for a weapon where you're trying to aim for headshots anyway, so any weapon where you're taking advantage of crit chance and crit damage, because getting a headshot also multiplies your damage, so why are you not aiming for the head? The final general choice is this Primary Dexterity mod. Now this is what you go to if your primary way of dealing damage is actually your melee weapon, because this is going to give you a lot of bonuses to melee. It's basically the exact same thing. It replaces Serration on your build, except you have to be running around and getting kills with your melee weapon to build up that bonus damage for your primary, if that makes sense. So if you're a big fan of melee, Primary Dexterity is the way to go. The other Arcanes are more sort of like specific Arcanes that we're not going to talk about. Primary Merciless, Primary Deadhead, and Primary Dexterity are the 3 go-to primary Arcanes that you want to get your hands on whenever you're doing Steel Path content. So just to give you guys an example of what a quote-unquote endgame build would look like, this is one that I would be using in the Elite Deep Archimedia game mode. So to explain it, I'm using Primary Deadhead to replace Serration. This is going to give us the base damage off our weapon as we are landing headshots and shots on weak points. I have Galvanized Chamber on here for the multi-shot, so this is replacing Split Chamber. I've got Critical Delay on here for our crit chance, so this is replacing Point Strike, but I do have a negative effect to fire rate on here, which I have to counteract. I'm counteracting that by throwing on Prime Shred. I've got High Voltage and Malignant Force on here to make corrosive damage because the enemies that I'm playing against are armored. I've got Vital Sense on here to enhance the critical damage because I'm dealing a lot of crits because of the critical delay mod. And I've got Radiated Reload on here to give myself radiation damage because the enemies that I'm playing against take bonus damage from radiation damage. And because I'm not using Rhino's Roar ability, I've went ahead and thrown on a Bane of the Murmur mod, but I could throw on literally anything else in this slot and still deal a lot of damage. You could consider throwing a Rhythm mod in this final slot, but something that I want to stress is that you do not need Rhythm mods to be dealing damage in this game. Just focus on the tried and true methods of increasing your damage and you're going to benefit a lot more. I see a lot of newer players falling into the trap of like trying to buy a Rhythm for their favorite weapon because they think it's a efficient way of like applying, higher stats and stuff to their weapons and stuff like that. Just don't waste the platinum on that. Like spend the platinum on Warframe slots and stuff like that just so you can do more content on your own without having to worry about buying a Riven from someone who's probably trying to scam you anyway. Here's an example of a shotgun build that I'm running. So this is for the Warframe, the Incarnate version. We've got Galvanized Hell. This is multi-shot, so this is similar to Split Chamber or Galvanized Chamber. Prime Ravage for crit damage, similar to Vital Sense. Contagious Spread, which is our Toxin mod for shotguns. critical deceleration, so this is similar to point strike or critical delay. I've got a cold damage mod on here, so this is going to combine with contagious spread to make viral damage. I've got a fire rate mod on here to counteract the negative fire rate from critical decel. Galvanized savvy, which is basically galvanized aptitude. And ammo stock in my flex slot because this weapon has a low magazine size, so I just wanted to have more magazine size for it. And again, I've got primary Deadhead on here to increase our base damage, and this is just going to replace primed point blank, which is the shotgun's version of serration. So then I can just, have more mod slots. So as you can see, some mods in Arcane are actually shared or have similar versions between the rifle and the shotgun category. So an example of a mod that is literally shared is Hunter Munitions. So if I could actually type Hunter Munitions, you see I can throw that on my rifle or I can throw it on my shotgun. It's basically the exact same mod. It is the exact same mod. I can just throw it on my shotgun and my rifle. Same with the Arcanes. I can throw primary Deadhead on my shotgun, or I can throw it on my rifle. So that's why these two things are being covered in the same video. Status chance works a tiny bit different whenever it comes to shotguns. It's basically like you can shoot more pellets if you put multi-shot on, and the more pellets you shoot, the more status chance you basically have. So by throwing multi-shot onto your weapon, you're also increasing your status chance, if that makes sense. So if all else fails, this is the type of build that you want to be shooting for on the majority of your weapons. This is a viral Hunter Munitions slash build, so you have viral from the Rhyme Rounds and the Malignant Force. You've got crit delay and vital sense for your crit chance and your crit damage. Vital acceleration for more fire rate because, faster fire rate means more damage. Hunter Munitions for slash. Amalgam serration in the flex slot, you can throw anything in there. Galvanized chamber for the multi-shot. Primary Merciless for the base damage, and then I've got Vigilante Supplies in the Exo slot, but you guys can totally ignore that. And again, if you didn't take anything away from this video, just take this, because this is the build that you can run on basically 90% of the weapons in the game, and it's going to do just fine. So anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something from it. Check that spreadsheet down below to see if it's worth using Galvanized Aptitude on your weapons. And with all that being said, like the video if you liked it, subscribe for more Warframe content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.